Okay, hi everyone. This is our digestion review. Let me just change the settings so I can see any questions you guys ask. Okay. All right, we should be all set. Just as a reminder, this quiz will cover the digestive system. It will cover nutrition as well as blood sugar regulation. It will not cover the pigs in the sense that I won't ask you where you would find this structure in a pig, but you should be familiar with the overall functions, structures, etc. of the digestive system. You should be able to, for example, look at a diagram of it and understand information about the systems. Okay. Let me see what else. This is a written quiz, like I said. On Tuesday, though, is the pig quiz, and for that one, you should be getting your photo books ready. Okay, so what questions do you guys have about digestion, etc.? Sorry. Let me see. I can remind you at first that you should make sure that you have, at the basic minimum, you need to make sure you know what all the organs do, the pathway of digestion, the functions, etc. But remember, you want to also make connections between things. So don't just memorize them. On that note, also, hello. The flashcards, some people had asked me for a key to the flashcard, so I do have a scanned copy. And right after this review is over, then I will post it to Google Classroom, so you can find it there as well, or you'll be able to find it there. So Matthew, you're asking if the questions on the class will be in order and random order. There's not really a specific order per se. I mean, they will cover different sections, but I would not say that there's a random or certain order. I think you should expect them to sort of, I guess you could say somewhat random then in that sense. The difference between soluble, no, I would say I would want you to know the overall what fiber does, like why it's important for digestion. So for example, knowing that it helps move things through your diet, essentially it helps there to move things through, that it helps you that it actually slows down how fast your blood sugar would rise because by pairing something with fiber, things like that, the things that it helps to prevent, all of those aspects. Exact number of questions, I'm not sure yet. I'm still working on it. So I would say expect that it will probably be about 1 or 2 pages front and back. It'll be a combination of multiple choice and short answer, etc. What other questions have you guys got? Why don't we start with, are there any digestion, like specific pathway of digestion questions that you have? Or questions on blood sugar regulation? I would say you should know things to the level that I've talked about them in your lectures, right? So all this stuff we talked about in the digestive system, I would expect you to understand the different organs, how the pathway works, what each enzyme digests, and in which organ things are digested. For blood sugar regulation, I need you to understand what insulin does, what glucagon is, how diabetes works, etc. Essentially, use your notes as a guide, because if you use your notes as a guide, then it'll give you an idea of how detailed I want it to be, right? Are there specific content questions you guys have? Things you're not sure about or things you want me to review? Let me see if I can find something else that might help you all. Oh, I see there's a question. Okay. So yes, in terms of the pancreas, remember the pancreas does a lot of different things. And one of the things that it does is it it's going to help you to neutralize the stomach acid. So remember, the chyme that's coming from the stomach is partially digested food, but also contains all that HCl, which is a pH of 2, which is really, really low. And that's not ideal for two reasons. Number one, the small intestine enzymes actually need to function at a much higher pH, right? They function at a pH of about 7. So, in order for you to actually get the pH to the right place now, because when you initially bring it into the small intestine, it's around 2, you need to add in the sodium bicarbonate from the pancreas. That's going to neutralize the stomach acid and raise the pH such that now you have a higher pH so that the enzymes in the small intestine can function. It also prevents you then from burning the um, burning the inside of the intestine. Vitamins B and K are important for your overall body function, right? So you don't need to know about specifically what they do. Just know that they are vitamins that your body needs. And so this is how you would get some of those vitamins. They are produced, yes, by the bacteria. So it's not that they dissolve vitamin B and K, they produce it through their reactions with the food um, in the large intestine. Sodium bicarbonate, yes, is for the small intestine, meaning that you've got pancreas. The pancreas is only delivering things to the small intestine. Pancreatic juice. So yes, pancreatic juice is a very general name. So pancreatic juice is a generic name for all things coming from the pancreas that go into the small intestine. So that's going to be pancreatic enzymes as well as sodium bicarbonate. Technically, all of that together is pancreatic juice. So yes, all those pancreatic enzymes are going to now help digest the rest of the biomolecules. Does sodium bicarbonate raise or lower pH? So remember, you're at a pH of 2. The more acidic something is, the lower it is, right? And so when you add sodium bicarbonate, which is actually slightly basic, you actually raise the pH. You can get a snack. Do you want to get a snack?
Hello.
Okay, now go get a snack. Thank you.
Let's go.
Remember also the pancreas does have its endocrine function, right? So you should know for this written quiz also that whole aspect because that's the insulin and the glucagon. Yes, you may. Just one. Oh, maybe Gina can help you get it. Somewhere. They're right there.
I'll get them. But those are out. There's some more. Where's Savannah?
They're probably down
there. Where's Savannah?
If you're looking for a different kind of cookies, probably in the cabinet. Are eggs and tofu lipids or protein? They are mostly protein. I think there are aspects of the yolk that maybe are a little, other biomolecules in there, but by and large, it's protein. Okay, Gina, if you can't find it, I need you to wait. Okay, you can eat this one instead. Let's see what else. Okay, so the main difference between type 1 and type 2, remember the end result is the same, that your blood sugar is too high because your body is unable to get the glucose out of your bloodstream. But what causes that is different for type 1 and type 2. So someone with type 1 diabetes, essentially their pancreas is not making insulin. They think it's possibly because of an autoimmune disease, or it also has to do, they think, with having maybe a viral trigger together with certain like genetic factors. But essentially, someone who is a type 1 diabetic is not able to make insulin. And if you can't make insulin, it means like you've thrown away the keys and you can't get the sugar out of your blood and into your cells, right? On the other hand, someone with type 2 diabetes, usually they are making some insulin, but it's actually more that their cells have gotten tired of responding to insulin. So their cells have become what we call insulin resistant. And in that sense, what it means is that they are now not going to be able to, even though they're making insulin, they're still not going to be able to take the glucose out of their bloodstream, right? So the treatments for those would be different. Um, Anyone who has diabetes that's untreated means their blood glucose levels are too high because, again, there's just no way to get their glucose out. But for someone who's type 1 diabetic, then they're going to inject themselves with insulin because they're essentially going to take over for the pancreas and make insulin, or not make insulin, but put insulin into their bloodstream and get the glucose out. Someone with type 2 diabetes would then not inject themselves because it probably likely not make a difference, right? Unless they actually are not making insulin. In which case, instead, they are going to usually manage their diabetes through things like exercise and diet, but then also they might give them some sort of medication that helps make their cells more receptive to insulin. The difference between pepsinogen and pepsin. So pepsinogen is the inactive version of pepsin. And so hydrochloric acid, or HCl from the stomach, is what activates, it turns the pepsinogen into pepsin. Bile breaking down fats is technically mechanical digestion. That's one of those tricky ones, right? Because we're used to everything around it. All the enzymes at the same time are chemical. But bile is actually mechanical. It's the idea that you're just taking a big blob of fat, right? And you're just breaking it into little pieces. And by having it now in little pieces, that's going to allow the pancreatic amylase or pancreatic lipase enzyme to come along and digest it more easily. So essentially what causes, there's lots of different things that could cause diarrhea, right? It could be bacterial. It could mean that something is causing the chyme to move through the digestive system too quickly and it hasn't had time to absorb it. But essentially that it means that essentially the colon or large intestine has not been able to suck enough water out of the feces. And so they are much more watery, right? And that is one of the disorders that could come about. Can I quickly go over the pathway of food? Sure. Okay. So if we go through the pathway of food through the digestive system, if I talk just a pathway, right? Food's going to start in the mouth. You chew it. And when you chew it, you go through mechanical and chemical digestion. Your teeth are going to help you do mechanical digestion by chopping the food up into smaller pieces. At the same time, your salivary glands are releasing saliva. Saliva contains amylase, and salivary amylase is going to help digest your starches into smaller sugars, simpler sugars. From there, it would go down the esophagus. Technically, it would pass the back of the throat, which is the pharynx. Then it would go down the esophagus. In order to make sure it goes to the esophagus, but not the windpipe or your trachea, the epiglottis is that flap of tissue that closes over your esophagus to make sure that you end up sending it down the esophagus. You push it down the esophagus through peristalsis, and at the end of the I need you to wait just a minute, Sammy, okay? Okay. So then you would end up at the entrance to the stomach, which is the lower esophageal sphincter. When that opens, the food, or the semi-digested food, which is called a bolus at this time, would then go into your stomach. In your stomach mixes around and moves around, and so those are a more peristaltic mixing waves. That's mechanical digestion. In your stomach, you also secrete pepsinogen, HCl, and mucus, right? So let's talk about what all those do. The pepsinogen is our inactive version of a protein digesting enzyme. When the pepsinogen gets put into your stomach along with the HCl will actually convert the pepsinogen into the active form pepsin. And the pepsin now will be able to start digesting the proteins in the food that you're eating. So that's the chemical digestion. From there, it would exit the stomach, go through the pyloric sphincter, and now into the first section of the small intestine, which is called the duodenum or the duodenum. And that's where it's going to finish off digestion. Now, it's going to get help from other organs that never see the food itself, namely the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas, right? The liver and the gallbladder send bile. So technically, the liver makes the bile, but it's stored in the gallbladder. And then the pancreas is going to send what we would call pancreatic juice, right? Which is going to be a combination of pancreatic enzymes as well as sodium bicarbonate. The pancreatic enzymes are going to help finish off your digestion, and the bicarbonate, as I said before, is going to neutralize the stomach acid. Also, remember that the small intestine itself will secrete some enzymes into the small intestine. So, you actually technically have 4 different places you're getting the digestive juices from. In the small intestine, it's going to remove, and then the second half of and third half of the small intestine, now it's going to have the nutrients get absorbed through villi and microvilli. Remember, they increase the surface area. You also do absorb some water in the small intestine. Next, you move on to the large intestine, which is also called the colon. And in that, there's 2 main things that are happening, right? Here's where you're going to continue, or really sort of you're going to absorb a lot of the water now that's still in the feces or in the waste or undigested material. You're also going to have bacteria living in your large intestine, so they produce vitamins B and K from the undigested material. At that point, whatever's left that didn't get absorbed, right, is considered feces or waste. It's going to go to get stored in the rectum, and from the rectum, it will exit through the anus. And that's your pathway of digestion. Let's see. Is chemical digestion any kind of digestion where enzymes are involved? Most likely, yes. I mean, but remember, we want to stay with the definition of chemical digestion, which is to say, are we breaking bonds? Are we changing the chemical structure of those molecules, right? Because with bile, for example, it is a substance, it's a liquid, it's a molecule, but it's not actually changing the chemical structure of lipids. It's just taking a big bunch of lipids and making them smaller bunches, but it's not breaking bonds. Whereas like amylase is actually breaking bonds in the starch to basically take glucoses off of it.
Then I am going to basically.
Okay, other questions you guys have?
This in here, then I am going to tuck this, and then I am going
Make sure you understand sort of, we've kind of already touched upon it a little bit, right? But make sure you understand like some of the things that could go wrong in the digestive system. So like ulcers, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, which is also called acid reflux, right? Make sure you understand what each of them are. Amylase is an enzyme. So it's an enzyme that essentially breaks the bonds in starch. And you actually have 2 different kinds of amylase. You have amylase that comes from the saliva, and amylase that comes from the pancreas. So together they take care of all the starches in the food you're eating. Sorry, it seems like there might be some extra noises over there.
What I'm meaning is that, so
Sammy, can you be a little bit quieter, please? Thank you.
I'm going to go like this,
I
and I am going to.
I don't know if I would say the gallbladder stores excess bile. I mean, I think essentially the liver produces the bile and it stores it in the gallbladder. But I think they can both deliver things to their, right? So a person can live without a gallbladder, but you definitely can't live without a liver, right? Because if you don't have any restored, it's okay. People have surgery to remove their gallbladders and they're still just fine. Gallstones so technically bile is made of what we call bile salts, and sometimes those salts will crystallize, like they'll solidify. So what happens is you end up with basically you end up with these like little rocks in the liquid in the bile, right? And I don't know if you could see it on the pigs, but there's basically this little duct, like a little tube that leads down to the small intestine. And so a liquid flowing through that tube is going to be no problem. But a solid, like, little chunks of rock, they can get blocked in there, right? They can get stuck, and that becomes really, really painful. In fact, some people who say gallstones are really, really painful, that's sort of why. It's because you have to basically wait for it to make its way all the way through that little tube. So sometimes the way they'll try to treat it, sometimes they just have to say, well, you have to wait it out. But sometimes what they'll do to actually help treat it is they'll actually like put a machine next to in that area, and they'll try to use like sound waves to like hit, like throw sound waves at the little gallstones to try and break them up into smaller ones so that they'll flow out more easily. Okay, monounsaturated fats versus polyunsaturated. So essentially, there's a couple different reasons, right? So first of all, monounsaturated fats, they do positive things in your body, right? They help increase your good cholesterol. And that's going to be really big because that helps you to clear cholesterol out of your bloodstream, as opposed to letting it hang out in your bloodstream, right? So that's sort of important, and you want basically more HDLs than LDLs. On the other hand, when you're talking about like polyunsaturated fats, they think that the combination, the way that the molecular structure of it is such that it makes it also susceptible to oxygen attacking it, and so that can actually mess up the lining of like your arteries, promoting cancer, things like that. So, and also if they get heated through like frying or something like that, and they become trans fats, right? Then now your body can use them, but it makes a molecule that's not quite right, and so it's like defective membrane and defective hormones. So they're definitely really different in that sense, right? What else? Sorry, there. LES. LES is the abbreviation for lower esophageal sphincter. So it's that entrance to the stomach. They used to call it the cardiac sphincter, but now not so much. And cardiac usually refers to your heart, and it's really not any part of your heart, right? So, but you might see it sometimes referred to as the cardiac sphincter. So just so you know, it's the same thing as the LES. Right. Other stuff? Your pharynx is basically the back of your throat. So yeah, effectively, throat is a very sort of general term for a location in your body, right? Pharynx is a little more technical, that it's the back of your throat. And so it's just the idea that when you chew, your teeth will form the food into a ball called a bolus. And then when it pushes it to the back of your throat, it actually triggers like a swallowing response. And that's when it'll start making you push your food down to your esophagus. So the pharynx is the technical name for the throat. You're not doing that right. Just go slow right now. Just go slow. Let's see. Other questions you guys have? What's the name of the flap that keeps the stomach acids in the stomach? There isn't really a flap. I think you're referring to the LES, the lower esophageal sphincter, at least on one end, right? Because when the LES is too loose or force it up through the LES, right? Then you end up with heartburn or acid reflux because it burns the inside of your esophagus. Common disorders of the digestive system, the ones that we have mentioned the most, I guess I would say, is if we work our way down, like from the top down, then we would say that there are, like in your stomach, a common disorder would be acid reflux or heartburn. Also in your stomach would be things like peptic ulcers, which is when the H. pylori bacteria weaken the mucous membrane or mucus layer such that the HCl and the pepsin can get through and start to digest your lining of your stomach, I should say. If we get to the small intestine, technically there are also duodenal ulcers, which is like the ulcers in the beginning of the. Go ahead. Maybe find something else in. Okay. So then you can also like have ulcers in the beginning of your small intestine. Moving forward, you can also have The other really common disorders then would be like constipation and diarrhea, which is really where you're looking more at like reabsorption of water in the large intestine. So I think those cover most of them. I think those are all ones I talked about in my class. Let's see, are dairy products good or bad? I don't think you want to classify everything as like universally good or bad, right? I mean, dairy products do contain beneficial things, but of course, they also probably do contain things that are, could be concerning as well. So I wouldn't worry about like universally like it's good or bad. Okay, so if you throw up too much bile, your esophagus right away. So first of all, you're not throwing up bile. When you throw up, you're throwing up essentially contents of your stomach, right? Your stomach is. Sammy, please stop yelling. Thank you. So if you throw up, you're throwing up stomach acid. So that's where it becomes damaging. In fact, it is not uncommon that if somebody, so no, the esophagus would probably not rot away in the sense that it's, the esophagus is going to be damaged by I need you to ask your father that question. I need to talk to the students, please. Okay, thank you. So when you're throwing up, your esophagus isn't like being inundated with acid like 24/7, right? So yes, it can be damaged, and that's why you sometimes feel like a burning sensation in your throat, in your mouth if you've thrown up. But it would also probably have then some time to recover. It's more the idea that like you will having the stomach acid come out often does damage things like your teeth enamel and things. So yes, there is damage from too much throwing up. It's actually one of the it is one of the problems that it happens when someone is like anorexic, for example. Okay, or bulimic, not anorexic. Bulimic being the and no, the appendix is not vestigial. They used to think it was vestigial structure, but it's actually not. They've since figured out that it has, they think it has immune system functions. They also, talk to your daddy, please. Talk to your daddy, please. They think it basically has the two functions, that it helps house good bacteria so that if you are having some, talk to your father, please. Talk to your father. Okay, stop, please.
Sammy, come here.
So Daddy can see better than I can. I can't see, sweetie.
Come here, Sammy.
Okay.
Sammy, come here. Can insulin regulate the blood sugar level by itself, or does it have to be? It can regulate by itself. I mean, essentially, insulin's job is to lower your blood sugar. So I guess you could say that, can it regulate all by itself without any glucose on your body? No, because then you have a problem in that if your body ever has too little glucose, then you have no other way to raise it, right? So it's an independently functioning hormone, but in order for your body to maintain homeostasis, you also need the glucagon. Does diarrhea or constipation have a negative effect on your colon? I don't think it inherently has to. No, I mean, I think the overall negative effect is you're not probably absorbing as much water as you should or want to, and that could have an overall impact on your body, but I don't know that it has an overall impact on your colon. If fiber is not digested or not absorbed, yeah, exactly. It's not digested and it's not absorbed. So you're not absorbing it, but it is helping to move things through your blood, your small large intestine. Okay. I think we've gotten everyone's questions so far. You need to talk to Daddy, please. Yes. As soon as you're done with this.
Humans don't essentially have a cecum. I mean, not in the sense that herbivores do, right? I mean, the human equivalent of our cecum is our appendix. Cortisol is a hormone. It has to do with stress, actually. But sometimes when people are under stress, especially more like long-term stress, I think they release more cortisol. And what that causes them to do is to retain more fat, usually in the abdominal areas. At least that's one of the impacts of cortisol in your body.
You can use this for your book.
My students, I never talked about cortisol. You don't need to know that. So essentially trans fats, which I was actually talking to someone earlier who mentioned to me that trans fats are effectively, I guess they've sort of taken a lot of them out of the food industry nowadays. They're different because they're not quite chemically, they're different essentially, right? So you could still have a trans fat get generated from like frying foods and things like that. But essentially in both cases, given their chemical structure, they can cause problems. I think I mentioned it before. Things like, how you have the, for the polyunsaturated fats, it's things like how it can, impact, how basically it can impact like the body's usage of it and what it could form, and the structures and molecules it can form can mess other processes up. I didn't go into a lot of detail on that, so I don't need to really know much more past that. For our purpose or my class, so I know that if you are talking to someone else who is other teachers may have mentioned other hormones as well. For my class at this point, the only hormones I've mentioned are insulin and glucagon. So for my classes, you only need to know insulin and glucagon. So simple carbs and complex carbs have to do usually with how many monosaccharides essentially are attached. So a simple carb would be like glucose, right? It's just one monosaccharide. Whereas a complex carb is going to be like starch, things that have a little more things put together. Could there be a huge problem if the large intestine does not absorb enough water or not at all in the chyme? Yeah, I mean, it's a problem. It's not like overall, of course, there's still it's still problematic because essentially the whole purpose of your digestive system is to get you those nutrients in water, right? So that's obviously going to be problematic because if you have no way of absorbing the water, that would be a big problem. There's no other way for your body to get it then. No, you don't need to know about the ingredients tell you. We just wanted you to be able to read a food label and sort of know what it meant. Is chyme just chewed? So chyme is just a generic term to describe partially digested food. It's not just chewed up food with saliva, no. It's like your food that's partially like chewed up, but also mixed around with your stomach, that also has some stomach acid in there and also has some pepsin, right? So it's a lot of stuff all mixed together. Your spleen is attached. So for the written quiz on Monday, you don't need to know the spleen. But for Tuesday, yes, the spleen is attached to the stomach and through the greater omentum, right? But attached, it's not connected. What I mean by that is like substances don't flow from the stomach to the spleen. It's just like sitting next to it and it's attached to it so it doesn't flop around too much with the greater omentum. Oh, an example of monounsaturated foods. So fish is a good example of monounsaturated foods. Olive oil, nuts, avocados, those are all examples of monounsaturated foods. Okay, let's see. I think we've got all the questions you have so far, but go ahead and keep those coming. Let me see if I can look and see if I can see anything else you guys might need to know. Any questions on the flashcards? Lipoproteins. So technically the lipoproteins are, again, those are the LDLs and HDLs. A lipoprotein is a combination of lipid and protein. For our purposes, think of them as they are transporters, right? The HDLs carry the cholesterol back from the bloodstream back into the liver. and the LDL is carried out to the bloodstream. So they're the transporters, and so that's why you want to have. So even though we call them good and bad cholesterol, they're actually not cholesterol at all. They're just the carriers of cholesterol. The gallbladder is attached to the liver. It's on the underside of the liver, and there's that little tube that's going to take the bile from the gallbladder down to the small intestine. Now, in the case of the gallbladder and the liver, then there is a connection, right? Because you're going to need to have some sort of tube or structure that carries the bile from the liver to the gallbladder. Is there a type of fish that does not contain a certain amount of? I'm sure there are probably varying levels of monounsaturated fats in fish, but I think effectively most fish, because they have omega-3 fatty acids, which is a monounsaturated fat, they're probably all going to have, to a large extent, some amount of monounsaturated fats. How much bile does the gallbladder hold? That's a good question. I'll be honest, I don't know. I think it holds a decent amount, but it's it's a fairly small pouch, so I would not imagine there's at any given time a ton of bile, right? But you can also imagine that your liver is refilling it constantly because your liver is probably constantly making more bile. But unfortunately, sorry, I don't know the exact amount. I can look it up for you. I can get back to you, but at this moment, I don't know. Let's see. So when you throw up and there's nothing in your stomach, then essentially you just don't throw anything up, right? You're probably, there's something call it like dry heaving, where you like try to throw up, but not much comes out. Sometimes you might just have like a little bit of stomach acid that comes out. But essentially, the act of throwing up is just your body like triggering peristalsis to go backwards. Whether or not you actually like have anything to throw up is different. What happens? Oh, sorry. Can low GI foods give you quick energy? They can. It's just that they don't. If you need to get your blood sugar up quickly, you wouldn't choose a low GI food, because the whole definition of a low GI food is that it's going to enter your bloodstream more slowly than a high GI food, right? So it depends on sort of to what extent, how fast you really need to get in there. I do see there's another question about something different. I'll hit the GI foods first, Ria, and then I'll come back to your question, okay? So why are high GI foods so bad, and why are they all unhealthy? A high GI, so remember, GI is not a measure of the health, right? GI is really the idea of just how quickly is it raising your blood sugar. So don't think of it as like how healthy it is, because really it's not. Instead, think of it more as like a high GI food. The only reason it could be potentially unhealthy is think of it as you are going to stress your pancreas out. Like if you keep eating high GI foods, that means you're spiking your blood sugar a lot, which is mean like you keep going to your pancreas and yelling at it and saying, hey, I need some insulin now. Hey, I need some insulin now. And you keep saying that, and after a while, the pancreas is really tired, and that's what pancreas is, stressed out, right? That can also then mean you're throwing a lot of insulin at your cells, which is why they think it might have a link back to, sorry, there's a fly there, to type 2 diabetes. Because if you continually throw insulin at your cells after a while might just get annoyed. Well, not that cells have feelings, but the idea is that cells will essentially stop responding to the insulin if it keeps getting it. But, something like M&Ms has a lower GI than like a rice cake. It's not to say that now M&Ms are healthier, right? It's just a measure of how fast it raises your blood sugar. And remember, if you pair a high GI food with a low GI food, or fiber, it slows down how quickly the sugar goes. So what you want is you don't want to be sort of spiking your glucose levels constantly, so that you're making your pancreas work really hard. So immunocompetent just means your immune system works correctly. It just means your immune system works as it should. If you only ever eat low GI foods, what will happen? Essentially just means your blood sugar doesn't get raised really quickly, right? And I would imagine some people probably do eat more low GI foods and high GI foods. There's nothing bad or good. It's just a question of how quickly you raise your blood sugar. Other questions? Let's see. What else could we go over? Let me see if I have any sort of review things here. Yes, diabetes is on the test. Basically, insulin lowers your blood sugar. So remember, with insulin, the idea is that it's like a key, right? When you have a lot of sugar in your blood, which is ultimately not a good thing to have long term, then you want to release the insulin so that it will take the sugar out of your blood and put it into your cells, or it'll take it to your liver and store your extra glucose as glycogen. Yes, chemical digestion in the small intestine. So, chemical digestion in the small intestine is pretty much everything, right? Because this is the point at which you're finishing off digestion. So, you have digestive enzymes coming from the pancreas as well as the small intestine itself. You also have bile, right? So, you can just say that in general, carbohydrates and proteins and nucleic acids all get digested by enzymes in the small intestine that are coming from the small intestine and the pancreas. As for the lipids, they're going to start by being mechanically digested by bile, but then they will be chemically digested by lipase. So if you cut your skin by accident, if you cut your skin and the wound doesn't stop bleeding, I don't know that that's necessarily a sign of type 2 diabetes. I mean, I think there's a lot of different signs for type 2 diabetes, so it's not like there's like only one set. Usually a big trigger or big reason to, worry about things like type 2 diabetes, or at least is like things like frequent urination or excessive thirst, or certainly like you can tell there's like what vocab terms. Again, I think you should refer to I don't have like one solid list of everything together, right? I think that for the quiz, you need to know all the vocab from your three notes. So the digestive system notes, the blood glucose regulation notes, and the nutrition notes. And then you should also look at the flashcards, the blue flashcards I gave you. And so I think the combination of all those, you should be really well covered in terms of vocab. So type 1 diabetes is not caused, they think, by a single thing. They think there's sort of several different components to that. They think there's an autoimmune component, which means somehow it makes you so that you could, your immune system attacks itself. They think there's a genetic component where some people have essentially certain recessive alleles, but not one, but many in most cases. And then also they, like I said before, they even think there could be some sort of aspect of it where it sort of gets triggered by a virus. But again, there's not conclusive evidence on everything. It's just they think it's sort of a combination of factors. So in both cases, like they used to see that type 1 diabetics would develop that disease when they were children. So they used to call it juvenile diabetes, whereas adults would develop type 2, right? So type 2 is one where there's still, they think, a genetic component, but it's also influenced by your lifestyle and your diet and your exercise and such. Is there a treatment for diabetes you could get? So no, unfortunately, at the moment, there is no cure for diabetes, right? There's treatment, but there's not a cure, meaning they have lots of different ways that they try to help a diabetic manage their blood sugar levels so that everything is essentially functioning as normally as possible. But at the moment, they don't have any way to just get rid of your diabetes. Now, there is technically, I think,
some research being done for things like an artificial pancreas, but that's very, very new. It's not something that's even widely available, but I think it recently became like available for like, testing and whatnot in the United States. If a person with diabetes, no. So remember, someone who has diabetes, although I don't know if they would be barred from donating blood, but remember, diabetes is not something you contract from someone else, right? It's not like your friend can give you diabetes because they have it. Diabetes has everything to do with what's going on with their pancreas and their cells. So if you're donating blood, you're just donating blood. It has nothing to do with you're not giving them your pancreas, and you're not giving them any of your cells that aren't responding to insulin. So exercising seems to actually help cells become more efficient at taking in glucose. So it kind of helps sort of do the opposite, right? Of if you keep just throwing insulin at them, exercise actually seems to help cells become more efficient, better at taking in glucose, and so that they're not as likely then to sort of just ignore the insulin, I guess you could say. In diabetes prevention, what would happen if the glucose concentration? Yes, so you can actually be way too high too. Like if your blood has way too much glucose, it can be deadly because essentially things aren't going to flow, right? I mean, on the simplest level, you can think of it as like there's going to be damage to tissues and organs because your blood is like maple syrup, like it's not moving anywhere, and then nothing's getting nutrients that it needs. So yes, there's dangers for someone who's untreated diabetic to be too high or too low in terms of glucose. For the pig practical, so you need to know the digestive system notes in the context of like what we practiced, right? So first and foremost, you want to be able to find the organ. Second, you want to know which system or systems it's a part of. Third, you want to know basic function. But then you need to know something beyond that, right? Because you want to make sure you can answer that final question. It's like a little bit extra something. Pancreatic juice, again, just as a general term of the stuff that comes from the pancreas and is dumped into the small intestine. So pancreatic enzymes along with sodium bicarbonate. Yes, Matthew, it would be catastrophic. I actually have a friend who, before she was diagnosed with diabetes, she didn't realize how high her blood glucose levels were. And when she finally did, when she did go to the doctor, then they told her that her blood glucose levels were like way, way, way too high. Like it was really dangerous. So the pig digestive system is essentially almost just like the human, right? The only exception being the cecum. So you should know both. You should know, and for a large part, that's completely the same, right? I would say the only really major difference between the pig digestive system and ours is that you should know they have a cecum and what the cecum does, namely digest cellulose, whereas ours, we have the appendix and whatnot. But think of it more as from a written quiz standpoint. You want to know what the human digestive system does, but also as a side note, know what the cecum does, because that is sort of the one difference, I guess you could say. Is an insulin pump? No, I don't think I'll be honest, I'm not super familiar with insulin pumps, but as I understand it, it's just a slightly different way of delivering insulin to your body. It's not like you just don't have to think about it, right? I think you do program it, so it's possible for it, and I think it depends. I think in certain circumstances, you can program that insulin to say, well, if I know I'm always going to eat lunch at a certain time, it might just sort of pre-deliver a little bit of insulin, right after it knows you've eaten a meal or something like that, or, around that time. But let's say you go and you have ice cream and you weren't expecting it. You can also, I think, like push, manually put into the insulin pump, like, oh, deliver it this way. So no, I don't. I think a person can change the insulin dosage, but it's usually attached to the person's body. So it's not like someone else is going in somewhere else remotely to change it. At least not to my knowledge of that. Can I post the slideshow from yesterday? Yeah, I can do that. Just give me a couple minutes after this and I'll post that. And no problem. I'll put that all together in Google Classroom. I'll just call it like digestion resources or something like that. Okay.
Actually, I think I'll put it in Google Classroom if that's okay, because some people can't see it on School Loop for some reason. So it seems like when I put it on Google Classroom, it's more accessible. Okay, so remember, when I say pig practical, I mean like mini pig quiz, right? Your mini pig quiz is on Tuesday, but your like big pig practical, like all the stuff at the end of the unit, is like May 10th, I think. And that's essentially like, well, we'll go over that, don't worry. But for now, just get ready for the pig quiz. Let's see. Other questions? Yes, Tuesday. Okay, so again, I don't want to get too far into it right now. The big pig practical is basically just like your big pig test. So without getting into too much detail, you will have to be able to identify all of the structures from all of the 4 dissections we do, as well as answer questions about those structures. And so we'll practice for that as we get close to it. Think of the mini pig practical, like the one on Tuesday, as like training to get you to the big practical. It'll be like 24 pigs, I think, generally we haven't finalized things this year, but it's like 24 pigs you have to identify things on. And like I said, I'll explain it when we get there. Don't worry about it yet. It's very far away. Other questions? Do you have pig identification questions? Because we can go over those too. Why are some... I think it just depends on that particular pig and the blood flow that was flowing at the moment. I mean, it could also have to do with preservative, etc. Is it dangerous if the rectum stores too much waste? Yeah, I mean, I think essentially if things can't, open up, then that would be, if things can't flow, then it would be problematic, right? That's why, for example, if someone is constipated and they're not, moving their waste along, sometimes then they'll have to have a medical procedure to help that, or they'll take medicine. In a hamburger, lettuce, tomatoes, and onions, no, they wouldn't be lipids. They would most likely be things like fiber and some carbohydrates. Not really protein either, I'd say. Not generally. No, right now you don't need to know about the kidneys and the bladder. We'll cover those later. Yes. So LES and pyloric sphincter, you can kind of think of them as the entrance and the exit to the stomach, right? The LES, both of them are like really thick rings of muscle. So think of them as like a really, really thick rubber band almost, that like when it's closed, it's like totally shut, right? But then when it opens, then food can squirt out. And so in the case of the LES, right, if that LES isn't staying closed for some reason, or food is being able to force through it, then you end up with acid reflux or heartburn, where the citric acid is now burning the lining of the esophagus, because that's not supposed to go there. Whereas the pyloric sphincter, again, is the exit to the stomach. So its job is to sort of open a little bit at a time. And when it does that, like it'll sort of slowly let the chyme into the small intestine and deliver it there so digestion can continue. What happens if your stomach has too much mucus? I don't know that there's a problem with that. I mean, I don't think it's going to be problematic. I don't think it causes an issue. I don't know if that's a condition people really have, but I don't think it's generally an issue. So I guess the simple answer is I don't know that there is any bad thing that comes from it. What else? Can your stomach, I mean, technically, I suppose yes, but it would be very, very, very unlikely for that to happen, right? Usually there's, number one, it's a fairly thick muscular sac. Number two, a person really would have to, eat quite a bit. But is it theoretically possible? I suppose so. Remember, I think I mentioned it in your class. Actually, I don't know if I did. The pyloric sphincter allows basically the chyme to exit the stomach. So it's not, there's really no like rules to it, right? The idea is just that the pyloric sphincter is really just like a opening, right? So if when it opens and it lets things squirt out, like everything that's on the other side can come squirting out. It's not like it only lets certain things out. So you could say that what it's allowing to exit the stomach is the chyme, but the chyme is now a combination of like partially digested food and stomach acid, etc. How long does it take for something to be digested? It really depends. I mean, depending on different sources, it depends 24 hours. Some sources say longer, but I think the thing to know is just it does take surprisingly longer than you might think, right? Like technically, when you eat breakfast, you're probably still digesting parts of it like much later, even into like dinner time or something like that. But the estimates actually don't match up. Like some medical sources say a certain number and other sources say another different number. So is almond milk a part of, well, saturated fats are typically from animals. So I would say if you had to count it somewhere, it's definitely not saturated fat. I don't know if almond milk would even be considered a monounsaturated fat. I'll have to get back to you on that one. But saturated fats are usually from animals. So that's why I would say definitely not saturated fats, right? Because that's things like fat, lard, etc. Things like that. Because if you think about it, they're like all coming from animal products, but almonds don't come from animal products. Yes, the chyme goes to the small intestine after it exits the stomach. It goes to the first section of the small intestine, which is technically called the duodenum. How many different kinds of fat? Again, just know what's in the lecture, the nutrition lecture. That's plenty. I'm not actually overly concerned that you know about all the different types of fats. It's just to let you know that not all fats are created equal, right? That there are differences between them and that certain choices might be more helpful than others. What else? I have a couple more minutes. Anything else? Really quickly, no one's really asked about it, but I'll bring it up just because I think it's really important and something that I noticed people didn't necessarily mention when I was grading your hamburger papers. Don't forget the absorption portion, right? We've talked a lot about digestion, but absorption is also key because the whole point of digesting your food is so that you can absorb it into your cells, right? So don't forget that the second and third portions of the small intestine are for absorption. And in those, you have the villi and the microvilli, right? They are going to basically increase the surface area because now by having these projections, when instead of like being flat, you have these like little finger-like projections, right? It gives a much greater surface area for you to absorb your nutrients. And that's key because now the more space you have in technically it's a small space, or you have more surface area to absorb those nutrients, the more nutrients you can get. Let's see, what does amylase break down in the mouth? Amylase breaks down the carbohydrates, normally the starch. Is it possible? I don't think it's technically possible. I think it would depend on the chemical reaction because essentially trans fats are just where you take a fat, an oil of some sort usually, and you bubble it like high temperature, high pressure, and you add hydrogens. So, and so that whole frying aspect of it. So is it possible? Sure. What do fats look like? Have you ever seen like bacon grease that's solidified or like Crisco or lard? That's what it looks like essentially. It's usually it's oily, it's whitish. Yes. So fats, essentially think of it as like oils come from plants and fats come from animals, basically. If I had to be like super general. So it can't be done in nature. No, like trans fats are produced through like Oils can be good for you. Yeah. I mean, like, but I mean, that's also it's tricky, right? I mean, there are certain oils that are not necessarily as good for you or the environment. So I would be careful not to say like all are good or all are bad, right? But Matthew, yeah. So as I understand it, no, you don't produce trans fats in nature, because the chemical reactions that normally take place to have those happen don't typically happen in nature. Right? Where are each of the biomolecules broken down? So carbohydrates are broken down in the mouth as well as the small intestine. Proteins are broken down in the stomach with pepsin, and then further in the small intestine. Lipids are only in the small intestine, and then nucleic acids are only in the small intestine. Okay, any more last questions? We're coming up on about an hour now. So if you guys don't have any more questions, I'll probably go soon. But if you do have some, go ahead and send those right now, and we'll get those answered. As a reminder, Mr. H is going to be online tonight, or not tonight, Sunday. Also, my computer's about to run out of battery, so just in case it cuts out on you, that's why. But hopefully you guys are good. Sounds like you guys are all good. I mean, it seems like people are asking good questions. And like I said, if you're not sure about something, just email me and I'll send you a response back. Right after I get done here, I will post the PowerPoints. Also, I'll post 2 PowerPoints. I'll post the glucose regulation PowerPoint we did on Monday. I'll do the practice one for the pigs that we did yesterday. And then I will also post the answers to the flashcards. Okay? So hopefully we're good. Yeah. All right, guys. Like I said, send me an email anytime if you need something. Oh, I don't think you could survive without a liver. The liver has so many different functions that it would be really difficult for a person to survive without a liver. I think you'd have to have all sorts of extra weight. The liver does a lot of stuff. I think it's a lot of stuff. So no worries. All right. So I will see you guys later. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the sun. And like I said, if you missed anything or you think of a question later, just send me an email, okay? You're welcome. All right. No problem. All right. See you all later. Bye-bye.